Here's a part of seeing the big picture, which is what we've been talking about. We're taking this month to celebrate the new year, which means we're going to be talking about some interesting new ideas, and the book that I've chosen to pluck a few of those ideas from is called The Big Picture by Sean Carroll. It came out in the spring of last year, written by, of course, the theoretical physicist Sean Carroll, and it was an instant bestseller. And in fact, if you look online and check out lists of the best science books of 2016, well, you'll find this one on several of those lists. However, just because it's a bestseller doesn't necessarily mean that it's an easy read. I've been working on it since last May, and I can just tell you that it takes patience, attention, and a certain amount of repetition to sort of get some of the concepts. And personally, I don't think we're challenged enough by the content of our popular culture. You know, everyone says we live in an information age and we become overwhelmed. I frequently hear people who say, oh, there's just too much information to make sense of. How do we know what's really true? And I think maybe that might be dangerously close to saying, I'm not up to the challenge of sorting and discerning. I'd really just rather have someone else tell me what to think, right? Someone else tell me what's true, because I'm not up to the task of sorting and discerning, up to the challenge. Well, if someone were to say that, I mean, at least that would be honest, but we're also selling ourselves short. Most of us, I think at some level, all of us are up to the challenge. The problem, I think, is that even though the truth can set us free, right? You've heard that phrase, the truth can set us free. It also imposes certain limits. There's an old saying that is misattributed to Gloria Steinem. Don't know who really said this first, but it says this: the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. That's because the truth is often what we don't want to hear. It doesn't confirm what we want to believe about the world, and so we find all sorts of devious ways to avoid facing the facts and facing the truth. One of our country's co-founders, John Adams, once famously said, "Facts are stubborn things. And whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." The message I get from the big picture is that it's okay to follow the facts and the evidence to wherever it leads, even if I have to give up a core belief or two or three along the way. Heaven forbid I should have to change anything ever about my belief system, right? Well, it's okay. The big picture says it's okay. We will not lose our sense of wonder, awe, mystery, whatever you want to call it. We won't cease to matter as individuals. In fact, awe and wonder can increase if we're simply willing to follow the facts and evidence to wherever they happen to lead. Awe and wonder might increase. We might even discover that life is more meaningful and that we matter more than we thought before, more than we had ever imagined. That's the possibility. That's the promise. I want to share part of a quote again that I used last week from the prologue to the book, The Big Picture. Sean Carroll writes, "I like to think that our lives do matter, even if the universe would trundle along without us. But we have to respect the question and work hard to understand how our desire to matter fits in with the nature of reality at its deepest levels." He acknowledges that we need to think that our lives matter. That is a deep, deep human need to believe and to know that each of us matters as individuals. What does it mean to be human in a universe that operates according to natural laws that are mathematical. How do our lives matter in that context? And they do. You know, throughout history, there have been those who have tried to convince us that the mathematical and somewhat mechanical approach that we get from science would turn us into cold, unfeeling, inhuman creatures, that the world would lose its beauty and its mystery. We'll all turn into Mr. Spock and his Vulcan friends from Star Trek. Remember Mr. Spock from Star Trek? Pure logic, cold, unemotional logic, allegedly, at least that was the story. Why should that be true? Why should that happen? Why would we matter less? Why would we cease to find meaning and purpose in life? And it's not true. The facts and the evidence show us that we've been immersed in the modern mechanical, mathematical, scientific age for a long time now, hundreds of years, and none of that has come to pass. Think about it. We are just as emotional, illogical, and passionate as ever before. Am I right? Yes. Sometimes to our detriment, but we are still emotional and passionate and often illogical, and somehow it all works out. So none of that has come to pass. Sean Carroll is talking about an approach, a worldview that he calls poetic naturalism, which means that we can follow the facts and the evidence wherever they might lead, and we can still think about the world with the mind of a poet, and we can still see it with the eyes of a poet, and speak about it that way, and wring all of the meaning and purpose and awe and wonder and mystery and mattering that we want out of it. The promise is that we won't lose our humanity. We'll find a new depth of meaning and humanity in all of that. Now, earlier I made a Star Trek reference. Any other Star Trek fans here? Am I getting too old for that? Oh, we got it. Okay, that's good to see. I love watching science fiction shows on TV. I grew up with Star Trek and all of the different spin-offs. You know, they hop around the galaxy, visiting hundreds of different planets. They meet all these new species and life forms. And it's fun to stretch the imagination and enjoy a good story. But the truth is that we'll be lucky to get to Mars in our lifetime, if then. Forget about other solar systems. The cold, hard truth, and the fact is that we can't travel faster than the speed of light. There's no warp drive. That doesn't mean I still can't enjoy science fiction and fantasy stories. You know, the interesting thing about Star Trek is that despite all the science and technology that they talk about, the phasers, the transporters, warp drives, and mind melds and stuff like that, they still have all of the human problems that we deal with today. And those are the things that really drive the stories. In some ways, their problems are a little more complicated because they're communicating with alien species and things like that. But they still boil down to the human qualities of fear, prejudice, bigotry, greed, jealousy. Those are the things that they're fighting. And the solutions are still things like honesty, integrity, open communication, building healthy relationships, empathy, compassion, love, all of those human qualities. That's the core of what's going on there. I notice also that in those shows the arts are still important. Poetry, music, things like that. Captain Picard loves playing his flute. Commander Riker plays a trombone in a jazz band. Dr. Crusher teaches drama and dance. And even Data the android is a concert violinist, right? They still love the arts. They still find meaning and purpose in beauty, in addition to goodness and truth. So what does it mean to think and see with the mind and the eyes of a poet? Well, here's an example. Back in December, I shared something that was written by Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk, a well-known author, and this is from his book, The Heart of Understanding. He talks about what it is to see with the eyes of a poet. He says, if you're a poet, you will clearly see that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there'll be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for this piece of paper to exist. Clouds are essential for the paper. No cloud, no paper. In fact, without sunlight and lots of other things, nutrients and soil, the paper couldn't exist. And Thich Nhat Hanh is getting at a concept here that he calls interbeing. Interbeing. One thing can't exist without the existence of something else. That's poetic. That's poetic naturalism. There really isn't a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. If we try to take that literally, it sounds like nonsense. But is it any less true? It's a poetic way of looking at the whole thing. Can we still talk about clouds floating in a piece of paper and remain true to what we know about reality? And isn't it an interesting exercise in human creativity? We're going to remember that statement about the cloud in the paper because it kind of smacks us in the face, right? It confounds us at first, and then the light bulb goes on. And in 3 short lines, we get this concept of the essence of interdependence, the web of life. A poet presents it to us in ways that maybe science and math can't. And yet, a scientist can sit down and work the whole thing out mathematically, right? How much rain the average rain cloud contains, how much rain a tree needs to grow to maturity, how many sheets of paper you can get from the average tree, all of that can be worked out mathematically. All of that is useful and accurate information, and yet we can still speak of it poetically. We can speak of it in different ways, and both ways agree with each other and serve different but equally important purposes. And as I mentioned last week, I think one of the biggest problems is that each side loses sight of the other. The poetic side loses sight of the fact that there are facts and evidence that have to be honored, and the scientific side so often tends to diminish poetry and philosophy and things like that. And that's stopping. That's stopping. So Thich Nhat Hanh, he considers himself to be a spiritual teacher and a poet rather than a scientist. You see, but that doesn't mean you can't do both. And here's someone else who demonstrates what it's like to do both. Sean Carroll talks about it in his book, but there's more to it than that. About 10 years ago, I discovered the work of a scientist named Brian Swimme. He's an astrophysicist, he's a mathematical cosmologist, and he wrote a book called The Universe Story. So here's a summary of his philosophy. This is how he looks at the universe. He says the universe is a continuous, radiant, numinous revelation, contemplating the wonders of the unfolding creativity of the cosmos is a mystical, ecstatic, awe-inspiring event. He talks about how activities that we take for granted and maybe even think of as mundane, they actually contain a much greater significance than we realize. It's not cold and mechanical, but we have to wake up to a greater reality, to a bigger picture, in order to be able to see it with the eyes and the mind of a poet. It's part of the process of waking up. This is an example that he gives in that book, The Universe Story. We're all able to move our arms and walk around, right? And why is that? Well, because we have energy in our bodies, right, that enables us to move around. And where did the energy come from? Take a guess. Food? Did I hear food? Yeah? Yeah. Pretty easily. Well, ultimately, the food we eat starts out with the food we eat. But where did the food get the energy? Well, the wheat that made the bread, the plants that made the salad or whatever it is you like, they all got their energy from the sun. And they stored that energy for us to use. So this energy that allows me to move around and to speak was quite recently part of the sun, literally. The sun gets its energy from a process called fusion. We didn't know that until the 50s. I just found that out this week. We really didn't know that until the 50s, that the process was fusion. The sun is a giant fusion reactor releasing the energy of hydrogen and helium atoms in the form of light, which the plants convert to energy, which we take in so we can move around. But of course, you can take it back even farther than that. Where did the hydrogen and helium atoms get their energy, or how was it that they came into being? Well, that goes all the way back about 14 billion years ago, close to what they call the Big Bang, the birth of the universe. So, there's this continuity, and it's mind-boggling. Coursing through each of us right now is the energy from the birth of the universe. These primordial particles that came together and formed helium and hydrogen, which fueled the sun, made everything possible. Movement, thought, consciousness itself is powered by this energy. So to wake up means that, in a very real sense, the birth of the universe is happening in each one of us right now. It's a very poetic way of looking at something that's also, could call it a cold, hard scientific fact. Gets a little bit warmer and a little bit less hard when we look at it that way. It's kind of neat. And it's not just the energy, it's the physical aspects of ourselves as well. The carbon-based atoms and the molecules that compose our bodies came from exploding stars, right? Those stars, those fusion reactors out there, do a lot of wonderful things, and then they blow up and they scatter all of these particles into the universe that become us physically. And that's not just speculation. It's a pretty solid fact. Remember Carl Sagan? He used to say, "We are star stuff." Exploding stars, the energy from the beginning of time, are right here, right now. Poetic language describing a physical and a mathematical reality. There's no reason to be afraid of that. The practical aspect of all of this is that we are reclaiming our power. We don't need someone else to tell us how and why we matter. We don't need someone else to give us meaning and purpose. We get to discover that for ourselves. We can start by following the example of the people that I've been quoting today. We can learn from them what it means to see with the mind and the eyes of a poet. And then we can start doing that for ourselves. Reality becomes less of a problem. Facts and evidence can lead to wherever they will, and it can never diminish us. I've given you a list of resources in the handout in your bulletin. If you want to get reacquainted with the world of poetry, there's a wonderful online resource called the Poetry Foundation. It's worth checking out. Or go back and read some of Thich Nhat Hanh. Or Cosmos by Carl Sagan. Oh my goodness, back in the 70s, he was talking in poetic language about natural things. Or The Universe Story by Brian Swim. And of course, if you're up to a challenge, there's always The Big Picture by Sean Carroll. So I'm going to leave you this morning with this poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, which tells us something about meaning and mattering in a vast universe. The poem is called Our True Heritage. The cosmos is filled with precious gems. I want to offer a handful of them to you this morning. Each moment you are alive is a gem, shining through and containing earth and sky, water and clouds. It needs you to breathe gently for the miracles to be displayed. Suddenly, you hear the birds singing, the pines chanting, see the flowers blooming, the blue sky, the white clouds, the smile and marvelous look of your beloved. You, the richest person on earth, who have been going around begging for a living. Stop being a destitute child. Come back and claim your heritage. We should enjoy our happiness and offer it to everyone. Cherish this very moment. Let go of the stream of distress and embrace life fully in your arms. And that's the big picture. See you next week.